good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. This is Dr. Sarah Renee Langley, and just wanted to say thank you so much. Happy Mother's Day to all you mothers out there as we are doing our webinar series. May is Mental Health Month. So all month we are bringing to you all the great information to help you to really be mentally healthy. And I am so grateful for your time. I'm so grateful that you have decided to join us. And I am just so excited just to share with you on this special Mother's Day announcement, or more so this special webinar, masterclass that I wanted to do, because definitely wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity, for all of you who, this is a day of celebration. This is a day of just loving on our mommies, or being loved on, because we are mommies. And then there's a time where many of us are grieving and sad because our mommy is no longer with us. And whoever mommy represents, whether it's your nana, your auntie, your godmommy, whoever it has been, the fact is, for most of us, we are so happy about Mother's Day because, hey, she's that gal who really stuck it out with us, who always looked out for us, who instilled so many type of the truths, or the way that we were able to live our life. And yet there are many of us who are also grieving because she is just not here. So what do you do? How do you manage your emotions? How do you manage appropriately to grieve? How is it that you now know, or what to do on actually allowing yourself to grieve? Many of us still don't have an understanding of what grief and loss is. Many of us have been taught to be strong, have been taught to not show weakness, to just deflect or distract, where and how we feel about grieving or being sad or being vulnerable. Oh my gosh, that's a dirty word. But what we're going to do is now address those things, because I had to make sure that I brought in a special guest who is a specialist with grief and loss. And her brand is all about helping us to grieve with hope. So I'm so excited to bring to you Miss Anitra Green. She's a licensed clinical social worker. And what she does is like I said, she specializes in grief and loss. And I can personally say that she has been a blessing to me. I had recently lost my mother last year of this time of the recording, and she was right there for me. And I'm just so grateful to her. And I asked her if she could please be a part of this conversation, to create a safe space, a sacred space, a space that breathes hope, that breathes relief, that breathes peace, as we all rally together to use this time to commemorate the memory of our dear loved one, and to be able to overcome, to continue to move onward, but with hope. All right, so let me go ahead and bring her on. And let me go ahead and connect everyone here. And I thank you all for your time. I thank you so much for just, again, being here with us. And why not celebrate this day together? Why not cry together? Why not? To tell you the truth, this is an amazing time. I mean, and especially wanting to help you to know what to do even during this pandemic. Like, isn't that something? How we have this going on right now. And not only do we have to learn how to grieve, not only do we have to learn how to deal with the effects of the pandemic, but now having to, during this time of dealing with the pandemic, how to manage our emotions, how to manage our mental health and wellness, how to manage our finances, how to manage our own selves. And here we are, Mother's Day. It's a different type of Mother's Day. And now we have to know how to grieve and mourn and move on even during this time. So, hey, I had to make sure I brought on some great specialists all month. So y'all make sure that y'all check back all the time during this month of May, so that we can make sure that we are giving you the information that you need, that is necessary for you to overcome during and after the pandemic. So I'm just going to put this in there right now, and I'm going to invite my good girlfriend, Miss Anitra Green, licensed clinical social worker. She does with grieving with hope, and I want to give her proper due. So let me go ahead and read a bio on her. All right. So I have to, when you turn a certain age, you have to make the screen go bigger. So you can read it. All right. So Miss Anitra J. Green was born and raised in Chester, PA. Okay, now. She achieved her bachelor's degree in social work from Westchester University, WCU, May 1998. I know that she graduated that year and that month because I was right there too. And her master's degree is in social work from the University of Pittsburgh in December of 1999. Mrs. Green is a licensed clinical social worker who has worked in social work field for over 20 years. And she doesn't look a day bit of 20, and has a specific interest and passion for supporting those who are grieving. She is the host and founder of the Grieving with Hope conference, which began in October 2018, and the Grieving with Hope conference call, which began in March 2020. On time, isn't it? She is currently a doctoral student at Widener University in Chester, PA, pursuing her doctorate in education and educational leadership K through 12. Anitra is also a woman of faith and has held various leadership roles within her church. She resides in Delaware with her loving husband and her beautiful daughter. Please, everyone, if we can welcome Miss Anitra J. Green to the stage. Hey, Anitra.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. Thank you for inviting me to this call today, to this Zoom. I'm honored to be here today.
So I am so grateful to you for just answering the call, and I am putting this out there to make sure that everybody is all in here so that they don't miss a beat of all of this great information that's going to be shared among us all. And I love these, the technology. You have to work around and work your way with technology so that everybody can get the information. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself and, what is it that have inspired you to be about grief and loss, grieving with hope?
Sure. So my journey goes back to 1998 and 1999. As you mentioned, I left Westchester in May of 98, and I started the University of Pittsburgh in August of 1998. So I went right after Westchester. And during my journey to becoming an actual therapist, I experienced 3 losses in 12 months. Mm-hmm. So just in a short amount of time that I was at Pitt, I lost a nephew to SIDS in August. He was actually born August 10th, 1990 on my birthday, and he passed in October. And then October, I got the news that my grandmother had pancreatic cancer, and she died January of 99. And then April of 1999, I lost my maternal matriarch. So my father's mother, who raised me, she was like a mother, January, and then I was followed by my maternal patriarch. So you're talking about 3 deaths in 9 months, and it was a journey. That personal experience, along with the work that I can do as social worker, I've been working with children for over 20 years, and I've had to deal with a lot of grief, particularly the last 13 years working in my hometown of Chester. There's just been a lot of grief and loss, unfortunately. And so between my own personal journey and working, one day God gave me a vision for Grieving with Hope, probably like 2015. And I wrote it and I prayed on it and I had dreams about it and it was very, very clear that the work, he wanted me to do more work and specifically focusing on those who are mourning. It's not something that I aspired to do. When I went into counseling, I didn't say, oh, I want to become a licensed, I want to specialize in grief. I never, so I'm grateful to do this work because it is not easy, but you have to have a grace for it, but I'm very passionate about it. And I thank God every opportunity I have to help any person who's on a grief journey.
Okay, that's excellent. And I thank you so much for sharing your journey and how this came about for you so that you can now be a blessing to others because you've experienced and to help us to now all learn how to grieve with hope.
Yes.
And what we're going to do, I'm going to call this out in terms of the technical difficulties.
Okay.
From time to time, there may be like a scratchiness, but we can get the gist of what you're saying. And hopefully you all can hear what we're saying, what I'm saying, what she's saying. We apologize in advance for the technical difficulties. But nevertheless, the show always goes on because there are people like you who are watching who are in need right now. And we appreciate your time. We appreciate that you even decided to show up on this webinar, on this masterclass, to know how to grieve with hope. So thank you for your patience with that. But make sure that y'all are sharing this out too, because you may know someone who also are in need of a safe space, a sacred space, who is grieving, who is alone, who is upset, who is mad, who's going through so many emotions and just don't know what to do. Please make sure that you do them a favor and invite them to this conversation so that now they know how to grieve with hope. This is what we're going to talk about throughout this time together. So if you have any questions, y'all can make sure that y'all inbox me, or not so much inbox me, but post it in the comment section, because I'm checking you out as well while I work this all out, right? So if you have any questions for us, for Anitra, for myself, please make sure that you put in the comment section. I'm going to be watching so that we can answer your questions appropriately. All right. So Anitra, did you have anything that you wanted to share before we begin this interview or this conversation?
Yeah, I actually wanted to share two of my favorite quotes on grief. I'm a person who's into quotes. I think quotes are powerful, and they're just, the words carry a lot of weight. So the first one that I want to read, it says, "The road through grief is a rocky one. Traveling along it requires courage, patience, wisdom, and hope." And that's by Candy Lightner. And then the second one is, "Grief is like the ocean. It comes in waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm, and sometimes it is overwhelming. All we can do is learn how to swim." And that's by Vicki Harrison. And I think that those two quotes are very, very powerful. And it pretty much describes the grief journey. And you'll hear me use the word journey, and I'll tell you why I use that as we talk.
All right. So then let's go ahead and go right into the conversation. And again, everybody, thank you for your time. We're having this Mother's Day special masterclass on grieving with hope. We understand that many of you are enjoying your day, and you deserve it, Mom. So go ahead and do you. Enjoy you today, because this is your day. This is your time to shine. No matter what's going on out there in the world, this is your time. You know, every day is your time. But I'm so grateful that we have a day designated, you know, for us to just rally together and just lavish you with all the love. Anitra, I was looking at some of the posts today, and I don't know if I know I've said it to you already, but I'm going to say this publicly right now on here. Happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So welcome. And I was looking at some of the posts. There was like at least two where I saw their good girlfriends of mine, and their children had surprised them with roses on the steps, you know, leading to the kitchen. And that was so beautiful. I said, wow, I can't wait for that to happen to me. Okay. To have the rose petals just, you know, cascading on the steps leading to the kitchen. For my one friend, her children, they know, of course they know her, they know their mom. So all she wanted was crabs. So she was so happy that she got her crabs today for Mother's Day.
Yes.
Oh man. And the other one is getting a whole full spa experience at home. So the children are bringing, I guess they're the ones that's going to be like the, you know, manicurists and the hairstylists and all that, but they are, you know, just lavishing their mother throughout the day and at her home. And it was just great to see. And, you know, we never want to take away from people's happiness to really be okay, to be happy, and to say Happy Mother's Day, or to feel okay that their mom is here and that they have the opportunity to love on their mom. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, when I thought about that today as I was scrolling, I noticed that there were people, also a lot of posts about loss. And it wasn't just, interestingly, it wasn't just posts about people losing their mothers, but it was actually posts from mothers who've lost children. Yes. And so, you know, this day is mixed with emotions. Even me, I mean, I had the dual experience of, I lost my grandmother, who I just told you about. She is like my other mother. So I woke up and, you know, you have that achiness, a little bit of achiness in your heart still, because there's not a time limit on grief. But then I was able to post about my mother. So and my mother that's here, but I do miss my grandmother. So, and my great grandmother. So you can actually be a person, experience multiple feelings, you know, just in a day. And so you're right. You don't want to take that away, the celebration, but we can also feel other emotions at the same time. I'm excited about my own motherhood and my mother-in-law, and it's people I'm celebrating, but it's also people that I am missing and mourning today.
Yes, yes. You know, Anitra, what we're going to have to probably do is we're probably going to like sit still, because it seems
Okay.
like if we are moving, we get scratchy.
Okay.
So we probably just got to sit still and use our hands to.
Okay. Yes, and I'm moving unintentionally. I'm in my peaceful place, my rocking chair. So let me put my feet on the floor. I wasn't intentionally rocking, but let me just sit my feet on the floor. Stationary.
See, you know, and laughter is great for the soul. And I keep checking myself as well. I tell you the truth, it's like the bloopers. I tell you the truth, and feature everyone. When I got on here earlier just to promote, I really wasn't promoting. I really wanted to fuss people out, Anitra, because of the fact that, as many of you know my grief story,
Yes,
my grief journey, as Anitra will talk more about the journey. I have recently lost my mother last year. And last year, I can tell you, and then we can go right into the conversation, Anitra. Last year, so she passed in end of March. We had the funeral in early April, and then Mother's Day came. But I'll tell you, I wasn't there. It's like I wasn't there. I didn't feel anything on Mother's Day last year. But now I'm more, I guess, aware. I'm more awake, or I'm more just aware. And so now I have the time to grieve, or it hit me. And I don't know, I do know, but I don't know, because you're the expert in this, in regards to not having grieved or to be impacted on Mother's Day last year, when it was so fresh. It was like a month out rather, to now I'm more conscious and more aware, and it's really hitting me. And just not knowing how this grief cycle is about. Like, I'm thinking that you're supposed to, either you go in one stage to the next, or once you went through the whole cycle, then that's it, you're good. Or even me being in as a therapist, shouldn't I already know what to do and how to manage that? So I guess the question would be, how does this whole grief and loss work? Like, especially for someone who may have deemed themselves as being a strong person, a person who knows and understands grief and loss, but yet it seems like it impacts people differently in different ways. Could you help to elaborate a little bit about that whole journey or process?
Sure. So just because some may not be familiar, I want to go back to when you talked about the stages of grief. So there are of grief, and now it's been updated to 6, and I'll talk about the newest stage in grief. But there's a Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she actually came up with the stages of grief after working with people who were facing death. So people who were, in nursing home facilities, in life. And what she found out was that those stages that individuals go through as they're facing their own loss of life is the same stages that people experiencing who are grieving the loss of that individual. And so when you talk about the different stages, the first stage is the whole shock and denial. And then there's anger, and then there's bargaining, and then there's depression, and there's one is meaning making. And so when you talked about, last year, it was fresh and it was closer to Mother's Day that this happened. And so you wasn't really experiencing it last year, but this year it is. The one thing that I do want to say about the stages of grief is they're not linear. It's not first it's this, second is this, and then you do this. It looks like a roller coaster. So when you think about all of the loops and for those of us who are courageous and ride, roller coasters, it's lit, it's dips, it's things that you can't see until you get close up on it. And so if you would think about a wild ride, a journey, and it looks different for everyone. She's also the same person who coined the quote, individual lives. And so what that means is, Sarah, that if you put 10 people in a room and we all lost our parent or whatever, lost our loved ones, your journey will look very different from mine. The person to the left would look different, and a person to the right. And that's the thing, that it doesn't look a certain way. There are people who are in shock for years. There are people who cry. There are people who haven't shed a tear after a loss. There are people who are able to laugh and look at pictures 3 months after it happens. And then there's people who 3 years later, they still can't look at a picture. So it's just important not to compare your grief journey to anybody. And I heard cited on the Grieving with Hope call the other night, that your grief journey is as individual as your fingerprints. And so you really have to not have an expectation of what it's supposed to look like. You know, why am I not crying? Well, how come everybody else is able to look at pictures and I can't? It's your journey. And my fingerprints are unique. That is how unique your journey is. And so I'm saying that because I remember when I lost my father, I was so busy planning funeral services and working that I did not grieve until probably 3 or 4 months later, like actually take a moment to pause for the calls and actually have to cry, because we're busy, we're planning, we're making phone calls. My father was widowed and has an oldest. And so, listen, I got to cry, but call the undertaker. I got to cry, but call the florist. I got to cry. So I think it was like 3 months before I actually begin to actually go on the journey. And so, that's what I would say about that journey. It's individual.
And I thank you for sharing with that. And I'm going to recap what you said, because we're going to work through the scratchiness with this whole technology stuff. So, and whatever that we didn't catch, then I'll just ask you to repeat. So if you can just repeat the 6 stages again, just one by one, so that it was clear.
Sure. So the first stage is shock or denial. Sometimes it's referred to as shock or denial. Then it's bargaining. Then it's anger, then bargaining, depression, then acceptance.
Okay.
And then the 6 is meaning making. That's the newest stage that's been added, is meaning making. Just meaning what purpose does this serve, and what meaning is this going to add to your life with the law? After going on this journey.
Okay. Can you repeat that one more time? So the meaning making is pretty much like, what is the meaning behind it, or what meaning you receive from it, or you give it?
What is the meaning of the loss to you, and how do you make meaning of it? Like in the middle of your world changing, what does this mean? And allowing it to become more purposeful for you, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. And if, please, you all that's watching, again, thank you for tuning in. This is Dr. Sarah Renee Langley, and I'm with my co-host here, Anitra Green. I want to call her Taylor, but no, she is Mrs. Green. Okay, so Anitra J. Green. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she specializes on grief and loss. So we are having this conversation today because many of you who may not be celebrating like you would like to, because you may be at a place or a state of grieving, whether it's from, your mommy had passed away, or whoever you classify as your mom had passed away as recent as yesterday to maybe 25 years ago. That, hey, we're here for you to create that safe space and that place of solace and growth and peace, to be able to grieve with hope. So I thank you for tuning in. And we're just talking about first the stages of grief. So Ms. Green had talked about how you have the stage of denial. Is that correct? Or shock?
Denial or shock. Some they're interchanged.
Okay. So shock or denial. And then you have the stage of, is it bargaining?
Anger. And it doesn't go in any order, any specific order. They list them that way, so I try to repeat them as they're listed, but they're interchangeable. I mean, they're not linear.
Okay, so you have, they're not linear, so you can be in any stage at any time.
At any time.
Okay, so you have shock or denial, and then you have anger.
Yeah.
Then you have bargaining.
Yeah.
And then
depression. Then acceptance.
And now meaning making.
Yes.
The newest one. All right. So if you have any questions, everyone, put it in the comment section. I'm able to check it. I'm able to see you. So please feel free to share any questions or comments that you have. And if you want to be a part of this conversation, I can always add you. I'm about to actually go ahead and post the link on the social media platform. So if you feel brave to come on this panel and have a conversation with us, we would be more than happy to invite you in it. So if you want to join us in the conversation, please, I'm just going to go ahead and post the link on here so that you can come on and join us. All right. So Anitra, Mrs. Green. Now, can you talk a little bit more about each stage or phase? Like what does it look like in each one so that people are aware?
Sure. So I'll start with shock and denial. And, again, you can stay in any of these stages for any period of time. You can be in shock for years. There are people who still have not accepted a loss that has happened because it's devastating. It's the most permanent loss that we will ever experience. And to me, I can't think of anything more challenging than a death because it is so permanent. It's really nothing else that compares to it. And there are many grief journeys. Today, we're specifically talking about death. In terms of today, this can be attributed to all losses. When people get divorced and they go on other type of grief journeys, these stages are present. But again, when we're talking about death, the permanency of it is what makes it shock and denial just looks like, I can't believe this. Not being able to wrap your mind around it. There are people who still make phone calls to individuals. They know they're not going to answer. They just say, I'm just going through my ritual because I still can't believe that this person is not here. And then they call the number because they're like, well, maybe this time somebody will answer. I still can't believe it. So it's just, that's an example of what that anger or that denial looks like. And you're numb and you still can't, like, I still can't, that I still can't believe this can go on for an indefinite amount of time. Anger. I think anger and depression can kind of resemble. The anger is just, the disappointment and the frustration of knowing that this person is going like forever. And so, it's not a time limit. It's like, what does forever mean? Like, how do you go from spending your life with a person? I mean, Sarah, you talk about your mom. I talk about my grandma. I was 25 when she passed away. And I'm like, for 25 years, I've had this bond. Who's going to love me like this? These are questions that I had. Or I would get angry. Anger might be that you're getting frustrated because other people have moved on with their life and you can't, or you don't feel like you want to. It looks different on different people. Sometimes our anger will channel us. I think about people who've had loved ones that are murdered. Mm-hmm. And definitely how your loved one dies definitely determines probably the intensity of your anger. I've seen people who have had loved ones murdered, and it's a different kind of anger. Outrage versus maybe someone who causes or just, were able to really accept it because it happened on their own terms. So anger looks very different. I think it depends on the kind of loss you've had. The bargaining phase is, and bargaining could happen right after the death. Sometimes we're bargaining with God. Sometimes we're bargaining in an anticipatory phase of grief. And I'm thinking about people who have loved ones who might be like in that last place of life or death in hospice. You can start actually before they pass away. Sometimes we're bargaining with God and we're saying, please, don't let this fate happen. Please do a miracle. And, and as I always say, sometimes God gives us and they transition in a way that we really weren't expecting. But that bargaining is just when you are really trying to make meaning and just really with life. Like, how am I going to continue to do this?
Say that again. I'm sorry. Say that again.
Sure.
It's getting scratchy again.
That's okay. The bargaining sometimes is just trying to figure out how you're going to continue to maintain certain things in life while you grieve. And so when we think about bargain, we think about, I'm getting a bargain. This bargaining is really asking and trying to really go through a process of surviving and trying to figure out how are you going to move forward in life, but also hold on to, you know, whatever needs to happen. And it's a lot of conflict that happens in that stage. Finally, once we finally kind of get to the place where we know that, okay, life is actually going to have to happen, and it's not going to be able to happen on a happen, then we get into the depression phase, and we know what that looks like. I mean, depression is depression is both emotional, and you can carry it in your body. So it's the not being able to get out the bed. It is the not wanting to get up and take a shower. It's the not wanting to go out, not wanting to take a phone call, not wanting to eat, not wanting to sleep, not wanting to, whatever your favorite thing is, it becomes insignificant. Your favorite food becomes insignificant. Your favorite movies become insignificant. And so, you know, and then it's hard because the world is still turning. Like, okay, my personal world has stopped. The rest of the world is turning, but your personal world stops. So how do you operate? Because everything else in the world is going, and you want it all to stop. You really do. Right. But your world has stopped when the rest of the world is still spinning. And that's a very challenging place to be in, but it's real. And depression is a normal part of the experience. And it's probably the one that we're most accustomed to. And people get, you know, concerned. This person isn't answering the phone. They're not washing their face. They don't want to get up. That's what journeys look like. And in the depression, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, about why we talk about grieving with hope. The depression can lead to hopelessness, and there's a normal depressed state that comes with grief, but then there's an abnormal phase. Spiraling out of control, and you can't function, and your daily, you know, abilities to even just maintain yourself. That is when I get into the whole, it's time to see a counselor. It's time to seek some professional help, because grief can definitely devastate your life. And there are people who are grieving without hope. And that can be a very dangerous place. Last is acceptance. I think that, you know, once you accept the death, it's a hard thing to accept. You wake up and you realize that, you know, life is going to be different. It never the same state. And I'm not saying that, you know, in a negative way. I mean that you have to adjust to a new normal. Life changes when you lose people.
Yes.
They're irreplaceable, and it's just whole new normal that you have to accept. And then the meaning making, I think what I interpret that phase as is, I'm going to carry this loss and allow it to not rob me of my own life's meaning. That's how I interpret it. But how am I going to use this? How am I going to allow this to catapult me and move me forward? How am I going to honor the people who I'm missing? How am I going to have the strength and the courage to face this thing so that it doesn't keep me from progressing for the life that I believe God has for me?
All right. Well, then thank you. And it's so much great information, and having to acknowledge, even with this great information that you're sharing and helping us to understand the whole process, Anitra, on this grief cycle, this grief journey. This technology is something else, because it's getting the points, and I'm going to make sure that we reiterate all that you're saying so that everyone can capture where there were parts that may be scratchy. And it's not on you. You know, we're going to put it on the technology. Daggone it. Technology, straighten up. We're paying for this, okay? You know, so work right in Jesus' name.
Yes.
So just to talk more into this, and everybody, again, for you tuning in, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. My name is Dr. Sarah Langley, and this is my special guest and host. This is my co-host, Anitra Green. She is a licensed clinical social worker who is a specialist with grief and loss. And we wanted to use this opportunity for everybody who may not be jovial today, you know, who are grieving and feeling so alone because of not knowing how to deal with the grief, not sure how to appropriately grieve based on how you were taught, based on what you've seen or did not see. And now it's just becoming too much, it's becoming overwhelming to the point that perhaps it can be rather painful. You know, it may turn into an unresolved situation. And like Anitra said, that it can turn into a part that you have to see a mental counselor for it. So to help you through this, to work out, we have created this safe space we created this opportunity for you to just not be alone. You know that we're present right here with you, and it's okay. It's okay. It's
It's
okay.
okay.
It's okay. It's okay to not be okay. It's
Yes.
okay to grieve. It's normal. And I can tell you that by firsthand because earlier, you know, Anitra and all them just made me cry.
Oh.
I was holding on to that. I said, you know what? I woke up saying, oh, this is a good day. I'm actually okay. And then I did a couple of things that reminded me of my mom from the hairstyle because she used to love some swoops for us. So I had to do the swoop today. That's why I call it swoop. And, you know, I got on her favorite color is yellow. So I have a yellow flower in my dress. And I had this beautiful charm, this bracelet that a good friend of mine had made that has a picture of my mother and myself with her colors of yellow and pink. And she loves red. So I got the red lipstick. So doing things that's going to make you remember your mom and to honor her. And again, whoever represents mom for you, this conversation is for you. But I tell you the truth, and it's okay to cry, y'all. I'm just being funny. But I sure enough thought that I had today together, though. I said, you know what? I made it a point. I said, I'm going to be good today. And I guess good to me translated to me not crying until everyone's sharing, oh, sis, I'm praying for you today, sis. Oh, I'm sending you a special prayer out to you, girlfriend. You know, oh, this is a picture. This is a meme of some beautiful flowers in honor of your mother. And, you know, it's like it just kept coming and coming and coming. I was like, okay, all right. And then I had the nerve to come on, you know, so the Facebook Live and social media platform to, you know, to promote this. And then that was the wrong move, Anitra, because all of a sudden everybody came on there, just in the hearts. I saw all the hearts coming up. And I just started crying. I just let it all out. And guess what? It felt good.
I love crying. I always tell people tears are like liquid healing. Just cry. Don't fight the tears. Just let it flow. And you feel better after a cry. I always feel so much better. So I say don't fight the tears.
Thank you. Thank you for that permission, Anitra. I think a lot of times we just don't give ourselves permission to not be okay, or we don't give ourselves permission to be weak and vulnerable. Oh, I wish we could talk about that, but that kind of will deviate. It's like just trying to always put on this face or this thing. And I'm not knocking to be strong, but if it's at a detriment, that's what I was sitting around thinking about that in my prayer time. It was like, okay, it's one thing to be strong, but if it's at a detriment to our mental health, to our emotional health, you know, to always be strong. When we have these types of emotions, Anitra, everyone, don't we? We have the emotion of sadness and sorrow and being tearful, and we have those emotions too. If they did not exist, I don't know. I don't understand. It's like they exist for a reason.
They do.
So I just don't understand why we don't allow ourselves enough to just be whatever it is at the moment. What's your thoughts?
I think it goes back to the whole vulnerability piece, you know, and not even as strong, you know, sometimes when people, I think about the day that Kobe Bryant's, I'm going to go back to that example of the day that Vanessa Bryant took the stand and she gave that speech. And I remember hearing people talking about how strong she was. And it's like, I think we see God's strength, number one, because God gives us the strength to be able to stand. And she attributed, like, I thank God for this moment. But people see that because they see standing on your 2 feet, Sarah, because they see you at work, on live. The pain of grief is not a joke. And it's so overwhelming that you really can't, we're not naturally built, but by the grace of God, to experience that moment. I think as a culture, and I talk about this on my podcast, and I've talked about it on my live for Mental Health Month. I think particularly, especially people of color we've been through so much that we've overcome, and this whole concept of resilience, that we don't really take the time to tend to or to embrace things that we're in pain.
We're in pain.
It's okay because grief is painful and it's challenging and it's difficult. So it's okay to cry. You're supposed to, it's a natural reaction. But if we can't get to the place where we can be vulnerable and not have to always be crying, doesn't mean that you're weak. And it's a quote that talks about grief is not a sign of weakness or strength, or people say, I don't want the sympathy Well, when you're crying attention, it's because you're heartbroken. When I'm crying, I'm not trying to, perform or put. This is the cost. Grief and this tears is the cost of love. When people say grief is the price that you pay for love, they are real. We're okay with showing anger. We're okay with showing, excited. But it's really hard to acknowledge when we're hurting and when we're sad or depressed. And then we want to fix it. And grief is not supposed to be fixed. It's not something to fix. I think people are like, oh, take a tissue. I don't want to see you cry. And it's like, it's not for you to fix. It's grief is to be experienced. It's not to be fixed.
Good.
And I was on a training one day, and I want to acknowledge, want to plagiarize. So I want to give people their shout out. I was in a training with Julia Mallory, and she talked about, she said, we can't out hustle grief. You can't be so busy. And I think we try to do that as a people. We go to work. We keep moving. We think that if we don't sit still, that this pain is leaving. And it's the truth. I've never heard a truer statement. So even for people who try to avoid it, if you don't acknowledge.
All right, everyone. So Anitra's going to come back. I'm going to paraphrase what she said, and I thank you all for your patience as well as dealing with the technical difficulties. But to paraphrase what she was sharing, she's talking about how pretty much grief, you cannot hustle or out hustle grief. She had gotten that as from a quote from someone. And that grief is to be experienced, not to be avoided, not to act like it does not exist, but it is to be experienced. And a lot of times, because of whether we were taught this way, whether our own experiences had told us, because see, we grow up, a lot of our decision-making, the way that we think, the way that we operate, the way that we behave, all stems from our upbringing, from what our first years on this earth. Whether we had, okay, she's gonna log back on. Thanks, Anitra. Whether it's from the fact of what we've seen, what we noticed in our upbringing, what we have experienced, and what we have concluded. Because you have to understand that in our head, in our minds, if there's a question mark there, we have to answer it. We're going to answer it even if we're wrong, like even if it's the wrong answer that we gave to that question mark. But nevertheless, as in human nature, we just have to answer those question marks. And then becomes now our habit, or what I call the unspoken rule, the unspoken norm, the unspoken principle that you live by. So that's why it's so important to know how you're thinking, to know how you're feeling. A lot of times, there's many of us who don't even understand or have a word to name our own emotions. We don't take the time enough to really sit in and experience emotion, to sit and experience the suffering and the pain, to get the answers from there, because we don't give ourselves enough time, and then we never understand this is going to hit. I know it's going to hit. But the fact that we don't understand why we feel the way that we are, because chronologically, you're the age that you are today. But if a violation, I call it a violation, if something has happened that didn't suit your fancy, then guess what? You know that you're that same age as you were when that offense happened. So an example, when I was 3 and my younger brother, I was 3, he was 1. Or let's say I was 5 and he was 3. And I think I did something to him. And he was hurt by that. And then years later, when we were attending to my mother, and many of us were at odds in terms of, because, this is our mother. So we didn't know what to do and how to manage and handle all of that in terms of her. She had Alzheimer's disease. And so we didn't know what to do and how to go about it. It was our mother. So we all reacted and behaved the way that we did. But sure enough, all the pain and the hurt came up from when we were 3 and 1, when we were 5 and 3. And you just have to check yourself as to find out where in the world are you on your own timeline? Where are you? Because again, you're the age that you are today. But if things have happened that were unresolved, guess what? You're still there. And there is high time for you to be released from that, to now catch up with your chronological self, with your age that you are today, so that you can move forward to getting your healing, to be able to grieve with hope. So thank you so much for everyone who's tuning in. Thank you so much, Bishop. I really appreciate you joining us. Yolanda Johnson. Hey, Sharia. Sharia said that these stages are real, but thank God at the end, there is acceptance, a new way of living, and that's okay. Thank you, Jonathan. How are you doing? I hope all is well with you. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and bring back Miss Anitra Green to the stage as we continue to converse in regards to grieving with hope, and just really bringing it home in terms of what stages or steps or tips do we give you so that you can now appropriately grieve. And again, I had also posted out there in social media land, if you are interested in joining the conversation, if you want us to bring you on as part of the conversation here, where you get to ask your questions and have your questions answered, please feel free to take the link. I posted it there. Let me post it right here with you all. Y'all are more than welcome to join into the conversation. And make sure too that you share out this information, because there may be someone that you know, it may not be you. You may be perfectly fine and enjoying your best life on this Mother's Day. So go ahead with your bad self. That's awesome. Now, if that is not you though, if you are one who are in need and you know someone who needs this conversation, to know about the grief cycle, to know about giving yourself permission to grieve, to emote, to be okay, to not be okay. If you're feeling alone, if you know someone who's feeling alone and that they've been grieving from year to year to year, again, hey, it impacts, like Anitra said, it impacts us in different ways in different stages of our life. But it gets to a point that if we are unable to function, we're unable to take care of our bills, if we're unable to work, if we're finding ourselves trying to look for external factors to cope, to numb, to avoid, to deflect, to distract, that aren't healthy choices. You know, we find ourselves not being able to really take care of our day-to-day. We cannot function and taking care of even our daily living abilities. That is when you are in need to talk to a mental health professional like myself or Anitra Green. So you make sure that you be true and honest with yourself and know where you are. To know where you are in this conversation, to know where you are, so that you too, as I bring her on, so that you too can know how to really kind of assess yourself and where you are, having that honest conversation, so then you can know and decide if you need to see us or if it's something that you can actually manage. And we're going to give you the tips and strategies on what to do to help you to appropriately grieve with hope. So I hope this is helpful for you so far. We thank you for your time. We thank you for the fact that you are making the time, because your time is precious and that you could be out there doing anything and everything during this time of the pandemic, right? But you are taking the time to be with us. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Hey, Miss Green.
I'm back.
Welcome back.
Technology, gotta love it.
Gotta love it. That's all you can do.
It's a gift. So yes. So my last words were, you can't out hustle grief. I think that's just the bottom line. We have to experience and have the courage to face it.
Yes, yes. And thank you for that. Who was that quote by?
That was a quote that I heard on a training with Julia Mallory.
Okay.
She's another sister who is doing a lot of work, meaningful work in grief. And she's been very helpful.
Good, good. All right, so then we're coming down to the stretch in regards to like tips and strategies then, because what is also interesting, I know, Anitra, you were talking about how so many different types, of stages, but also where people are in this grief journey. And knowing, if you haven't shared already, what makes it a journey as opposed to a process, or like you use the word journey. I wonder why.
Yeah, so I actually want to read you a definition of journey.
You do that. I'm just going to grab something.
Okay.
Continue to talk to the people.
All right. Continue to talk to the people. All right. So I want to let you all hear the definition that Webster gave for grief. I'm sorry, for journey, for the word journey. It says journey is usually travel that requires a long distance and is often met with dangerous or difficult circumstances, versus a trip that is brief, swift, or ordinary. And grief is anything but brief, swift, or ordinary. And then the reason that I use grief journey is because it is a long-term process. And as I said before, grief is not just about death. Grief is about loss. So in this current pandemic that we're in with COVID-19, there are all kinds of people on grief journeys, from losing their jobs to losing the normalcy to losing, you know, control, financial losses. So grief, I always say grief is a journey. Be prepared to go on it. Take your patience with you, take your courage with you, and take hope with you. And so when you hear me use the word grief, you will always hear me say grief journey, because that's exactly what it is. It's not an occurrence. It's not a singular time frame. It is a process that looks different at different stages of life, especially if you're grieving a death.
Yes. And thank you so much for sharing with that, because see, that's the thing. It's like, while we're having this conversation and we're welcoming people to be a part of this conversation as well, to really just share and be okay and to be vulnerable. It's not a dirty word. It's not a cuss word, y'all. We can be vulnerable. It's a part of an emotion, a feeling, like, you know, it's a state of being that it's for a reason. That's where our healing, our freedom, our liberation, our hope, our happiness, all of that is right in that when we pass through it, but through learning and understanding. And the fact that, and that with Anitra, and she's sharing with you about this journey, that it's like you're going through this journey toward an end goal, toward that prize, toward that light at the end of the tunnel. But, you know, it's like that light that is there awaiting you, and to look at it and treat it appropriately so that you can effectively be able to mourn and grieve with hope, and to now be able to be free and to understand, get to that place of acceptance and meaning. What's it called?
Meaning making.
Meaning making. So that you can now make meaning. What does it mean to you? And, you know, it's, I know we have to have a part 2 of this conversation, because while we're talking about the, you know, Mother's Day and people being able to grieve appropriately, in and of itself, just to introduce this conversation, that we can have a part 2, Anitra. So just
definitely a part 2.
Now, in the part 2 I'm talking about is that we collectively, globally, are grieving.
Yes, the whole world is on a grief journey.
Right. So the fact that collectively and then individually on something that's unrelated to what we're globally, you know, grieving over, it's all this grief. And that's exactly why we're having this series, everyone. You make sure that you check back here. I'm talking about on my page, on any of my social media pages, to check in, because every day we're doing these webinars, these masterclasses, to help you to now know how to overcome during and after the pandemic. Because it's one thing now, as things seem to be, you know, opening up and wherever the country is right now, nevertheless, we don't know what we're going into after the pandemic. Like, it's going to be this new normal that we keep saying, and many people want to go back to the old ways, but that's over. It's not going to be the same. So what do you do, and how are you going to manage that? So you make sure that you tune in here on my social media pages, or go to bit.ly/Power Talk Real Talks, and make sure that you register so that you can exclusively get all of the different trainings from all the various great experts handpicked for you, who are bringing in great information to help you to know how to overcome, how to, you know, be mentally healthy, how to be holistically whole, you know, so that you can be able to handle whatever comes now, during, and after this pandemic. So we definitely have to have a part 2 in terms of, you know, the whole global.
Yes, the global grief.
But I don't know if you have, as I want to thank Mike, thank you for tuning in. Angel, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, everyone. Do you have any questions for Anitra at this time? Because we wanting to be respectful of your time, we're going to be wrapping up in a few. So if you have any questions about grief and loss, if you have any questions in regards to the grief cycle that she shared and talked about, the journey and the different tips and strategies that she'll, you know, walk us through and you know, lead us out into the conversation, please make sure that y'all drop it in the comment section so that we can make sure that we address your questions accordingly. But did you talk about, Anitra, if you can do 2 things? If I don't know if you had talked about already, in regards to mothers or those who may have lost a child or have a child that's incarcerated and things like that, and their own particular grief journey. If you could share a little bit about that, and then just tie in tips and strategies overall of what you think would be best for us as we can grieve with hope.
Sure. So, as I said earlier, grief is just not about death. It is about loss. And for the purposes of Mother's Day, I kind of want to steer the conversation back to what Sarah said. There are mothers who have lost children, and there are children who have lost parents. We know that the parent-mother bond is probably one of the strongest bonds that exists. Mothers are the carrier of life. And before we even enter this world, they have, we're forming a bond even before we show up in the earth. In utero, we're forming a bond and we're connected. And so that attachment, you will hear people say, when I lost my mother or losing a child, and losing a child is from natural age. And when that does not happen, it is very traumatic and it is very overwhelming. And so,
Anitra, I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. I was saying that the mother-child bond is very strong, and the difficulty with losing a child, and, parents have spoken about that no parent expects to bury their child. Just from the natural order of things, we expect that we're going to age and get older, and that, we're going to not outlive our children. It's just a natural stage. So when that happens, whether it's from natural causes, from things from cancer to a crime being committed against a child, it's all overwhelming. And so, and even for that incarcerated, for people who have lost their children, because there are some mothers, I was on a call yesterday when people were talking about their sons are doing 20, 30 years and some are doing life. That is a loss. Yeah. And a loss is a loss. It's not really a comparison. It's not, well, if it's this kind of loss and it's different, they're still going through the same stages of grief that a mother who has lost her child to the grave, the mother who's lost her child to life in the prison, they're going through the same journey. Mm. What I want to say about all of it, in terms of managing it, is first we have to go back to acknowledging that we are in pain. There is no remedy for grief except to grieve. That means feeling, being sad, crying, going through the stages. And even, I want to say this because I know that a lot of people that are watching this are people of faith, whether it's Christian, Islamic, whatever you may hold on to. That's a way of life. Even with your faith does not insulate you from the feelings of grief. Your faith can be rocked with grief. And no, does it, I've been a Christian my entire life, but when I was on my grief journey, thank God I had my faith, but it did not insulate me from the pain. It didn't make it disappear. And it's okay, when people say you can have Jesus and a therapist, it's okay to have your faith and still seek counseling. Yeah. Because I think that we've been kind of, have the mindset that all we have to do is pray. That's it. Talk to God about it, cry, and just go ahead, and it's just going to disappear. Grief requires work. It does. Journaling, crying, talking, praying, reading, taking your walks, coping skills, transition, counseling. If your grief is not allowing you to, function daily and have, get up and go to work, if you're having suicidal thoughts, grief can be very destructive. I remember reading an article about one of the fathers of an individual who, committed suicide. He could not manage his emotions. And guess what? He was the next person who did it. He couldn't deal with the pain. And you hear those stories because everybody doesn't manage their grief. It's very challenging. And even people of faith, people who are strong, like Sarah said, the strongest of them, people who you never saw, maybe cry or show any vulnerability, you really can't prepare for grief. When it shows up, somebody said it's like grief, the quote, sorry we had to meet like this. You cannot plan for it. Even when you think you're planning for it, even when you're waiting and you hear, until you go on that journey, you really can't plan for it. So my encouragement is get some coping skills. What can you do? Everybody had you, only you know what works for you. For me, I went to counseling. I highly suggest counseling for grief, especially bereavement. I highly recommend it because it is a journey unlike any, it's nothing to compare it. I also encourage you to journal. If you're a person who doesn't like to talk, but you like to write, I encourage you to put your thoughts and feelings on paper. Exercising is excellent. Walking. Exercising is not just good for your body, but it's endorphins that's released that's good for your mind. Listening to music was common for me.
Say that again, the last.
Okay. Being okay with not being okay. Being honest.
Yes.
And I've heard a sister say in another conversation, honor your feelings. Yes. Don't try to dismiss them quickly. I love when Melanie said that in a conversation that we were, I was in a Zoom training, and she said, honor your feelings. Honor it. If you're sad, don't dishonor it by saying, I'm okay, I'm not all right. You're not being honest with yourself. It's okay to not be okay. I also encourage you to read. I read a book called Grieving with Hope. It's actually, I didn't create that name. It's a lot of people grieving with hope, but it is what God gave me for this organization. But there's a book called Grieving with Hope. And I encourage you to read. When you become educated on a topic, it helps you understand that you're not the only one going through this. When I first read about the stages of grief, when I first heard about it, I was like, wow, this is like everybody goes through these phases. It's not just me. You become empowered when you are educated on a topic. Mm-hmm. Listen to podcasts. Get on conversations like this. When Sarah is posting something, log in. I have a conference call that I'll talk about as we wind down, but any type of way that you can connect with others, every time you go into those environments, you get equipped to get more tools. When you hear somebody else's story and their testimony, it's equipping you to understand that I can make it too. So, I would just encourage you to use, all the tools that you can pull out. I think about grief. It's like, okay, if you're building a house and you're trying to, solidify something, you need all kinds of tools. You need all kinds of tools for grief. And bring your faith with you. You don't have to, if you're going to counseling, don't think that it's a lack of faith if you have to seek a counselor. Bring your faith in the room with you when you go into counseling. Talk about God and how you're feeling about your grief journey and what part he plays in it, or God, questions. Bring your faith with you.
Yes.
Spirituality is an important part of all experience. We're mind, body, and spirit. So bring your faith with you. But don't think that, because of your faith that's all you need. Because I promise you. Wait, Sarah, am I right?
You ain't lying. You ain't lying.
Your faith is a part of it, but it's God gave us tools, and he gave us therapists, and he gave us books, and he gave people wisdom. So use it all.
Amen. Amen to that, Doc.
Thank you. Going to prophesy. Dr. to be.
Oh, Lord. This was awesome. I'm happy and I feel full. How about you all? Checking in just to see if you have any questions or comments.
Any questions? I hope I was clear, and through the technicalities and all of that kind of stuff, the message was put out there.
And amen. And so when we have recapped and reiterated as well, Anitra, and one thing that you said. So the bottom line is, everyone, you have the opportunity to grieve with hope. And